a truly accomplished military leader who indeed closed the historical gestalt of his state. The son of the father of the nation, whose rise to power is officially declared the day of national salvation of the Azerbaijani people.
We have one true God, one revered prophet, and one esteemed president, and that individual is Heydar Aliyev.
The main ally and younger brother of the cunning and powerful Sultan Erdogan, indeed.
Turkey will, without hesitation, stand against any encroachments on the rights and lands of Azerbaijan.
Perhaps it was from Recep that Ilham learned precisely how to subtly humiliate and put the bunker Tsar in his proper place, all while slyly smiling directly to his face. Apparently, it is precisely the strong shoulder and unwavering support of his older Turkish brother that allow Aliyev not to be an obedient puppet in the hands of the Kremlin elder. Official Baku maintains neutrality in the Russian-Ukrainian war.
You know that Ukrainian children regularly visit us as guests. We will do everything in our power to help, because we know what it means to face great difficulties.
At the same time, Azerbaijan providing humanitarian financial assistance to Ukrainians.
20 tons of humanitarian aid from Azerbaijan have arrived in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro.
And moreover, Ilham publicly spits in the face of the Kremlin dwarf, demonstratively ignoring his favorite propaganda symbol, parade of victory hysteria.
This would mean that he believes Azerbaijan has managed to leave the sphere of Russian influence enough to allow him to make this move. Because this is a demarche.
Putin is openly infuriated by Aliyev's independent behavior. After all, the Kremlin is used to pulling the strings of all its neighbors, just like it does with the Belarusian puppet. In public, there are smiles, honor and respect, but in reality, Ilham knows the true value of Russian friendship all too well. His father Heydar surely told his son how Russia can suffocate you in its brotherly embrace, and how easily it will sell you out when it suits its interests. You don't know Panikovsky yet. Panikovsky will sell you all out, kill you, and sell you again. In Azerbaijan, people have learned from their own experience. Russia is a treacherous, cunning, and hypocritical neighbor, undermining the sovereignty and territorial integrity of anyone it considers weaker. And you can't trust or believe it.
These days, you really can't trust anyone at all, can you?
Moscow began its bloody subversive activities against Baku even before the collapse of the USSR, when in January 1990, the Soviet army under the command of General Lebed shot and killed more than 100 protesting Azerbaijanis. They had taken to the streets of their capital against the backdrop of the escalating Karabakh War.
Every mother gives birth to a son with the hope of having grandchildren in her old age. For her, whether his name is Vanya or Magomd, doesn't matter, he is the very best. Maybe others might notice some flaws in him, but for her, he is the best. But there's no need to cut this natural life short with a bullet or a piece of shrapnel.
On that historic day for the nation, the former chief of the Azerbaijani SSR Security Service, member of the CPSU Central Committee Politburo, and KGB Major General Heydar Aliyev, while in Moscow, spoke out against Soviet authority and supported his compatriots.
The first to express his stance on this bloody tragedy was the national leader Heydar Aliyev. The very next day, speaking at a meeting in the permanent representation of Azerbaijan in Moscow, he clearly declared that he considered this act illegal and entirely contrary to the principles of humanity.
It was precisely then, in January 1990, that faith in Moscow and the Communist Party finally died in Azerbaijan. And at the same time, the star of the nation's savior rose in the sky.
Azerbaijani society went through the profound shock of the 1990s, experiencing significant turbulence, devastating military defeats, and the pervasive fear of its own profound helplessness in the face of what was essentially Russian expansion.
The Aliyev dynasty would come to power in 1993, when, in addition to the war with Armenia, an armed rebellion led by Colonel Suret Husanov would break out in Azerbaijan. He was something like an Azerbaijani prototype of future separatists, such as Zakharchenko, Givi, and Motorola.
Morning dawn.
Everyone here is still a little bit asleep. War doesn't let people...
After a series of failures at the front, for which Husanov was blamed, he was removed from his post as the president's representative in Karabakh. Shuret disobeyed the order and unilaterally withdrew the combat units loyal to him from the front line. Of course, this only worsened the already dire situation for the Azerbaijanis at the front. The government tried to suppress the rebellion and arrest the colonel, but the insurgents defeated their opponents. Moreover, taking advantage of the fact that most of the army was fighting in Karabakh, Husinov began a march on Baku. He would attempt to capture the legitimate president and seize power. By the way, the weapons for this insurgent and his henchmen were, of course, supplied by Russia. Specifically, the 104th Airborne Regiment. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Go to a store here and you can easily buy almost any kind of uniform you might want. Were those Russian soldiers or not? They were local self-defense forces, you know.
The armed rebellion and political crisis in the country would have a negative impact on the Karabakh front. While the Armenians are pressing on the front lines, in the rear, the Azerbaijani version of Denis Pushilin will start taking charge. At this critical moment for the state, the president of Azerbaijan, Abulfaz Elchibey, will turn to the head of the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, Heydar Aliyev, for help. A week later, Elchibey will flee.
It is now definitely time to run quickly.
It's time, brother, it's time! The reins of power will pass to Aliyev, who, despite the dire situation and the fact that Baku is practically surrounded by rebels, will manage to negotiate an end to the uprising. The significant price of this truce will undoubtedly be the appointment of Shuret Husinov as the new prime minister.
The situation in the east is a truly delicate matter.
Just a year later, President Heydar Aliyev will accuse Husinov of attempting yet another coup. And Shuret will flee. Where do you think he went? That's right, to Russia. However, 3 years later, Moscow will eventually extradite the fugitive colonel to Baku, and he will be sentenced to life in prison at home. But you remember, Russians never abandon their own. By the way, while the Russians were helping the Armenians in the war for Karabakh and assisting Husinov in destroying the country from within, many Ukrainians were fighting on the side of the Azerbaijanis. 2 Ukrainian pilots who died in Karabakh were awarded the highest honor, the title of National Hero of Azerbaijan. Military pilot Ruslan Polovinko and civil aviation pilot Viktor Seregin lost their lives in that first Karabakh war.
This week we are remembering the heroic deed of Azerbaijan's national hero Viktor Seregin. He made significant contributions to the creation of our country's Air Force. On the 28th of January 1992, he was transporting civilians to a safe place when suddenly Armenian militants began firing at the helicopter.
For Azerbaijan, the outcome of that first Karabakh war was similar to the annexation of Crimea and the seizure of part of Donbass for Ukraine. Lacking both a strong economy and an army, in 1994, Heydar Aliyev barely managed to stabilize the situation within the country and was forced to accept humiliating agreements with Armenia, which was backed by Russian bayonets. However, Aliyev was able to draw the right conclusions from these failures. Baku completely reoriented itself toward closer ties with Turkey and the West, demonstratively turning its back on Moscow.
Little hut. Little hut. Now turn your back to the forest and your front to me.
The cessation of hostilities allowed Aliyev to focus on comprehensively rebuilding the country's economy and in particular on significant land reform. But the truly key and pivotal moment in Azerbaijan's remarkable rise was the so-called contract of the century. This is no small change at all. Steal from pockets. Then the government reached an agreement with major Western companies to develop oil fields in the Azerbaijani sector of the Caspian Sea. Contracts were signed with British, American, Turkish, Saudi, Norwegian, and even Scottish oil companies. Klondike, El Dorado, the contract of the century played an exceptional role in attracting investment and developing the country's industry. The phoenix was gradually rising from the ashes.
I'll buy a car with a tape recorder. I'll have a suit tailored with a sheen.
Of course, along with the state, the wealth of the Aliyev dynasty flourished as well. While caring for the state, Heydar never forgot about himself, his family, friends, and close ones. As the saying goes, everything for friends, the law for everyone else. While Haydar's opponents were swiftly sent to prison for corruption and back in the USSR, during his KGB service were even lined up against the wall his friends, and relatives were allowed everything. For example, this is how the famous Soviet Azerbaijani singer Muslim Magomayev spoke about his friendship with the elder Aliyev.
When I first arrived in the vibrant city of Baku, we met and he generously said, "Please choose any apartment you truly like." That is precisely how we became well and truly acquainted.
Despite his dictatorial tendencies and a number of other shortcomings, for his compatriots, Haydar was both king and god. It was extremely important to them that their leader had not forgotten the main issue, Nagorno-Karabakh. But fulfilling the cherished dream of Azerbaijanis was not meant to be for the elder Aliyev. In April 2003, while speaking at the Palace of the Republic, Haydar clutched his heart. 6 months later, the elder Aliyev would die in an American hospital. While the best Turkish and American doctors fought for the president's life, Azerbaijan was in full swing preparing for new presidential elections. In the fall, shortly before his death, the father of the nation withdrew his candidacy in favor of his son, Ilham. The rapprochement with the West initiated by Haydar meant not only economic and technological growth for Azerbaijanis, but also a strengthening of democratic sentiments and views. Despite his authoritarianism, Haydar Aliyev was loved by the people. But when it came to nepotism and his son ascending the throne, many people immediately had questions.
Ilham Aliyev rose to power against the backdrop of so many blinded and maimed people. These brave people sacrificed their very lives on the arduous path toward true democracy and genuinely fair elections. The people do not truly love him, just as he clearly does not love the people.
Here's how one of his prominent political opponents vividly described the current president of Azerbaijan. Ilham Aliyev is an independent leader, distinct from the direct influence of the Kremlin, and represents a more reasonable and pragmatic version when compared to someone like Ramzan Kadyrov. Ilham's power is the result of the work of the security forces. His rule is maintained by suppressing opposition forces, placing relatives in key government positions, and, just like Ramzan in modern Chechnya, under Ilham, the cult of his father's personality flourishes, expands, and strengthens. Alongside openly exploiting the memory and name of his father, the younger Aliyev set about purging all of his father's former associates, all those whose authority, connections, and resources could even theoretically pose a threat to the new leader.
The high-ranking officials who had remained since Haydar Aliyev's time were removed from their posts one after another. All government-related business began to concentrate in the hands of Pasha Holding, which belongs to Mihriban Aliyeva. This process unfolded rapidly and was completed in 2023.
Ilham's people replaced the old guard from his father's era. The second most powerful person in the country, the vice president, was appointed his beloved and loyal wife, Mehriban.
By my order, Mehriban Aliyeva has been appointed to the position of first vice president of Azerbaijan.
The Aliyev dynasty has occupied the Azerbaijani throne for more than 30 years now. The son continued his father's work, not only in the fight for Karabakh, but also in establishing a dictatorship.
Everyone you see here wants to die, but they can't.
As of today, Azerbaijan belongs entirely and completely to the Aliyev clan. Legends are told about the corruption of the president's family. In 2011, Washington Post journalists discovered that at that time, Ilham's 14-year-old son, Haydar II, had become the owner of 9 luxurious mansions in Dubai. The total amount is impressive, coming to about $45 million. According to investigative journalists, the real estate owned by Aliyev's children around the world is estimated at $500 million. By the way, I've been meaning to ask you, why do you need so much money? In addition to changes within the country, the son also adjusted his father's foreign policy course. Relations with Europe and the United States cooled, and it's no wonder. In the end, democracies always have a hard time coexisting with a dictatorship.
Let's talk about Assange. How long did he spend in the Ecuadorian embassy and for what reason? Where is he now? You held a man hostage for his journalistic work. Essentially, you killed him both morally and physically. You did this, not us. Now he is in prison. So you have no moral right to talk about a free press.
Losing Western support and not wanting to become dependent on Moscow again, Ilham began to strengthen his ties with Ankara. This particular trend became especially pronounced with the rise to power of the Turkish Sultan, Recep Erdogan. Ilham Aliyev always continued to keep in mind the cornerstone issue for millions of Azerbaijanis, the Nagorno-Karabakh region. It was precisely the strong friendship with Turkey that brought the Azerbaijani armed forces to a new technological level. Turkish instructors, from one of NATO's strongest armies, are deeply integrated into all of Aliyev's combat units. Baku purchased modern weaponry from Ankara. Hundreds of T-300 and TRLG-230 multiple launch rocket systems, Cobra and Cobra II combat reconnaissance vehicles, and hundreds of Bayraktar drones. Sultan Erdogan is, in essence, the behind-the-scenes architect of Ilham Aliyev's victory and triumph.
The Lakin International Airport was officially opened, the third significant airport on the recently liberated lands of Azerbaijan. The leaders ceremoniously cut the ribbon.
While Yerevan pinned its hopes on Moscow, Baku placed its bet on Ankara and did not lose. During the Second Karabakh War, Azerbaijan fully regained this territory. According to Western media reports, immediately before the actual start of hostilities, with the direct assistance of President Erdogan, Syrian mercenaries from various pro-Turkish armed groups were reportedly sent to the region of Karabakh. Armenia ultimately lost the war, and their supposed allies, the Russian Putin peacekeepers, never truly dared to intervene in the conflict. Azerbaijan achieved an unconditional victory over Armenia, which was cowardly abandoned to its fate by Russia. All the Kremlin truly had the courage to do was to unleash all of its dogs upon its own long-standing allies.
The youth of Armenia must clearly understand that Nikol Pashinyan is indeed a traitor to the Armenian people and their nation.
Meanwhile, Kremlin media prostitutes trying to whitewash Putin's disgrace and cowardice are attacking the Armenian authorities, while Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has begun to establish relations with Aliyev and Erdogan. In other words, Moscow was not only humiliated in Karabakh, but was also thrown out of all possible negotiations and further political processes throughout the entire region. As a bonus, Aliyev's triumph has sown discord within Putin's favorite project, the Collective Security Organization. After the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia quite justifiably accused Russia and other CSTO members of betrayal.
Over the past 2 years, CSTO member Armenia has been subjected to aggression by Azerbaijan at least 3 times. It is disheartening that Armenia's membership in the CSTO did not deter Azerbaijan from aggressive actions, and even more so that, in fact, to this day, we have not managed to reach a decision regarding the CSTO's response to Azerbaijan's aggression against Armenia.
That is why Ilham Aliyev can confidently look Putin in the eye and openly call things by their proper names. That was the case with the Azerbaijani civilian airplane, which in December 1994 was shot down by Russian air defense over Chechnya. The plane crashed in Kazakhstan. More than 40 people died, including 28 Azerbaijani citizens.
People tragically fell and the plane subsequently crashed.
Aliyev decisively and without false diplomacy cut off attempts by Russian propagandists, security officials, and politicians to shift responsibility for the death onto others.
I can say with confidence that the blame for the deaths of Azerbaijani citizens in this disaster lies with the Russian Federation. The attempts by Russian state agencies to cover up this incident and insist on absurd versions cause us surprise, regret, and rightful indignation. We demand justice, we demand that those responsible be punished, we demand full transparency.
A strong and immediate reaction from Baku promptly followed after the manipulative actions of the Russian pseudo-historian and negotiator Medinsky, when he attempted to justify the ongoing war in Ukraine by directly comparing it to the situation in Karabakh.
Surprisingly, Medinsky does not know that Karabakh has never been a disputed territory. We would like to remind everyone that Karabakh is the ancestral land of Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, the assistant to the president of Russia is comparing the Russian-Ukrainian war to the situation in Karabakh. Such a comparison is inappropriate, since Azerbaijan has never violated the territorial integrity of any country and has never waged an aggressive war against any country.
Ilham Aliyev also did not play along with the mad Tsar and his increasingly growing delusions of grandeur. When Putin summoned all his loyal puppets to the capital of Mordor for the Grand Parade, Aliyev was one of the very few who publicly refused to take part in the Devil's Ball.
Putin's significant role, and indeed the role of the Kremlin, is being diminished, even belittled.
Of course it is diminished because Putin looks like a loser, especially absolutely right. After the second stage of the Second Karabakh War, when the Armenian population of Karabakh left those territories, this was a direct humiliation for Putin, who had supposedly promised this population will remain there.
Such slaps in the face to Putin from Ilham are already becoming a good tradition. Turkish teacher Erdogan can clearly be pleased with his Azerbaijani student. Proofreader A. Yegorova. Aliyev knows very well the value of friendship and a shared past with the Russian Federation. Azerbaijan understands Ukraine like no one else. In Baku, they will never forget the pain and humiliation of the unjust loss of their rightful territories. Yes, Ilham Aliyev is no angel. He is an authoritarian ruler. But unlike most leaders of post-Soviet countries, he is not a puppet. His strength and power do not depend on the will of the Kremlin. He doesn't need to grovel, adapt, or crawl before Vladimir Putin, as his Belarusian colleague Alexander Lukashenko regrettably does, by decisively taking back the disputed territory of Karabakh right under the very noses of Putin's soldiers. Aliyev not only earned the profound love and deep respect of his own people, but also clearly showed other nations. Putin is demonstrably weak, and he can and indeed should be put firmly in his rightful place. After all, for every single force, there is always another opposing force. The main thing is to truly know how to choose your friends wisely.
Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.